The Galactic Academy was a symbol of unity and competition, a testament to the vastness of the galaxy and the incredible diversity within it. Every year, its prestigious endurance competition drew the brightest and strongest students from countless star systems. Each participant carried the pride of their species, eager to prove their superiority in a grueling test of strength, intellect, and resilience. This year, the stakes were higher than ever, as the event would be broadcast across the galaxy, showcasing the participants' feats to billions of viewers. Among the competitors stood Harry Carter, the lone representative of Earth. To the untrained eye, Harry was unremarkable, a medium-built human with no visible enhancements, no cutting-edge technology, and no entourage of advisors. Unlike the towering Clitherans with their exoskeletal armor, the Vorthi with their biomechanical implants, or the Heliarians whose psychic abilities allowed them to manipulate their environment, Harry seemed almost out of place. But Harry wasn't here to impress with appearances. He had come to prove something deeper: the strength of the human spirit. As the participants gathered on the starting platform, Harry could feel the weight of the stares. The murmurs of disbelief and the occasional outright laughter were impossible to ignore. A Clitheran competitor, towering over Harry with shimmering green carapace, sneered. "A human? They might as well send a hatchling. You won't last a day on Varkalon," it said, referring to the hostile planet where the competition was set. Harry smiled politely, refusing to engage. He had heard it all before: the dismissive remarks, the underestimations. Humans, it seemed, were often categorized as primitive, a species born from a death world that had no place among the elites of the galaxy. What most failed to understand was that being from Earth, a planet fraught with natural disasters, predators, and the harshness of survival, was precisely why humans excelled in the face of adversity. But that was a lesson Harry knew they would learn in time. The starting bell rang, and the competitors were teleported to Varkalon's surface, where the challenge would begin. The planet was infamous for its treacherous landscapes, razor-sharp cliffs, acidic rain, and sprawling deserts where temperatures could fluctuate by hundreds of degrees within hours. It was a place no one would willingly visit, let alone race across. The first stage of the competition was a mile-long swamp teeming with carnivorous plants and quicksand traps. The alien competitors activated their advanced gear immediately. The Vorthi engaged their anti-gravity modules, gliding effortlessly above the swamp. The Heliarians used their psychic powers to bend the plant life away from their paths, while the Clitherans simply charged through, their tough exoskeletons impervious to the swamp's dangers. Harry, however, had no such tools. He waded into the swamp cautiously, testing each step. His boots were equipped with a basic anti-suction mechanism, a simple but reliable technology developed on Earth for marshy terrains. The swamp was alive with movement. Tendrils of vines reached out, sensing his presence. Harry remained calm, using his knife to cut through the occasional aggressive vine while keeping a steady pace. While the others raced ahead, Harry conserved energy, knowing the competition wasn't about speed but endurance. The alien spectators watching the live broadcast were quick to dismiss Harry. "Pathetic," one commentator remarked. While others harness the pinnacle of their species' evolution, the human relies on primitive tactics. How quaint. By the time Harry emerged from the swamp, the other competitors had already reached the next stage, a rocky canyon with near-vertical walls. Undeterred, Harry took a moment to assess his surroundings. His clothes were damp, and his muscles ached slightly, but his training back on Earth had prepared him for this. Humans, after all, were known for their ability to recover quickly, a trait born from centuries of enduring Earth's challenges. As Harry began scaling the canyon walls, he noticed something unusual. Several alien competitors, despite their head start, were struggling. The Vorthi anti-gravity modules faltered in the strong magnetic fields generated by the canyon's mineral-rich rocks. The Heliarians, accustomed to using their psychic powers for precision, found the environment too chaotic to manipulate effectively. The Clitherans, while strong, were too heavy to climb efficiently and were losing precious time. Harry, on the other hand, climbed with practiced efficiency. His movements were calculated, his grip firm. He used natural handholds and footholds, adapting to the uneven surface with ease. By the time he reached the top, several competitors had fallen behind, forced to reroute or seek alternative methods to ascend. The next phase took them into a dense jungle, where the air was thick with humidity and the sounds of unseen predators echoed ominously. This stage required not just physical endurance but also sharp instincts and adaptability. The Clitherans, with their bulk, found it difficult to navigate the narrow paths, while the Heliarians' psychic abilities were rendered ineffective by the jungle's strange flora, which emitted a natural psionic interference. Harry moved through the jungle with caution, his senses heightened. He remembered his training in Earth's rainforests, where every sound and movement could signal either danger or opportunity. Spotting a pack of stalking predators in the distance, he quickly altered his route, moving silently and blending into the foliage. His ability to read the environment and adapt on the fly allowed him to progress steadily, avoiding unnecessary risks. Meanwhile, the alien commentators began to take notice. "The human isn't fast, but he's consistent," one of them observed. "It's almost as if he's accustomed to environments like this. Could it be that Earth's harsh conditions are actually an advantage?" As Harry emerged from the jungle, he found himself at the edge of a vast desert, the final challenge of the day. The twin suns of Varkalon beat down mercilessly, and the air shimmered with heat. Many of the competitors had already crossed into the desert, their advanced suits shielding them from the worst of the conditions. Harry, however, carried only a simple hydration pack and a reflective poncho designed to deflect heat. The desert was an unforgiving expanse of dunes and rocky outcrops, with no visible landmarks to guide the way. Harry knew dehydration and disorientation would be the biggest threats. Using the sun's position and the shadows cast by the rocks, he navigated carefully, taking short, measured steps to conserve energy. As night fell, the desert's temperatures plummeted, but Harry was prepared, having brought thermal insulation layers in his lightweight pack. When Harry finally reached the checkpoint at the end of the desert, he was neither the first nor the last. But what mattered most was that he had made it without using any advanced technology, relying solely on his training, instincts, and determination. For Harry, this was only the beginning. The real challenge and the real opportunity to prove humanity's resilience lay ahead. As the sun rose over Varkalon, its harsh rays illuminated the barren wasteland that served as the next phase of the competition. The terrain ahead was both daunting and deceptive, a labyrinth of jagged rocks, shifting sands, and geothermal vents that hissed with bursts of scalding steam. The competitors stood at the starting point of this stage, their determination palpable. Among them, Harry Carter adjusted his simple gear, silently preparing for what lay ahead. The alien competitors were less subtle in their preparations. The Clitherans, with their enormous frames and thick carapaces, boasted loudly about their plan to bulldoze through the rocky terrain. The Vorthi, ever meticulous, synchronized their biomechanical enhancements to optimize energy efficiency. The Heliarians, serene and confident, meditated briefly, their psychic auras glowing faintly as they attuned themselves to the planet's rhythms. To them, Harry seemed like an afterthought, a human whose primitive methods would inevitably lead to his downfall. When the signal to begin sounded, the competitors surged forward. The Clitherans, true to their word, charged through the rocks with brute force, their armored exteriors deflecting the sharp edges. The Vorthi relied on their anti-gravity modules once more, hovering above the uneven terrain, while the Heliarians glided gracefully, their psychic powers creating subtle pathways in the chaotic landscape. Harry, however, moved at a deliberate pace. He had learned during his training that speed could often lead to mistakes in treacherous conditions. The sharp rocks underfoot threatened to tear through his boots, and the rising temperature from the geothermal vents created pockets of unbearable heat. Using his experience from Earth's volcanic regions, Harry navigated with precision, testing the stability of each step before moving forward. The first challenge of the stage came in the form of a deep crevasse, its edges jagged and unstable. Most competitors crossed with ease, the Vorthi simply floated over it, while the Heliarians used their psychic abilities to manipulate nearby rocks into temporary bridges. The Clitherans, confident in their strength, leapt across, their powerful limbs propelling them to the other side. When Harry reached the crevasse, he paused to assess the situation. Jumping wasn't an option, the gap was too wide, and a fall would be fatal. He noticed a series of smaller rocks jutting out from the walls, creating a potential path. Tying a length of rope to his belt and securing the other end to a sturdy anchor, he began to climb down into the crevasse. The alien spectators watching the live broadcast gasped at what they perceived as a reckless move. The climb was arduous. The heat from the geothermal vents made the air stifling, and the rocks were slippery with condensation. Harry's hands ached as he gripped the sharp edges, but he remained focused. Halfway across, one of the rocks crumbled under his weight, sending him swinging precariously. He tightened his grip on the rope, his heart pounding as he stabilized himself. Inch by inch, he made his way to the other side, emerging from the crevasse covered in sweat and grime but unscathed. This display of resourcefulness didn't go unnoticed. The alien commentators, who had been quick to dismiss Harry earlier, began to change their tone. The human might lack the sophistication of the others, one remarked, but his adaptability is intriguing. As the day wore on, the terrain grew more unforgiving. The competitors faced narrow passages filled with poisonous plants, their thorns exuding a toxic sap that could incapacitate anyone who made contact. The Vorthi and Heliarians used their technology and powers to create protective barriers, while the Clitherans relied on their thick exoskeletons to push through unscathed. Harry, however, had no such defenses. He improvised, using a machete to clear a path through the vegetation. His movements were slow and deliberate, ensuring he avoided the dangerous thorns. At one point, he encountered a dense thicket with no clear way through. Instead of forcing his way forward, Harry climbed a nearby rock formation to scout an alternative route. From his elevated vantage point, he spotted a narrow, less obstructed path that would take longer but was safer. This decision cost him time, but it allowed him to preserve his energy and avoid unnecessary risks. By mid-afternoon, Harry caught sight of the other competitors in the distance. Many of them were beginning to falter. The Clitherans, despite their physical prowess, were struggling with the intense heat their exoskeletons, while durable, retained heat, causing them to overheat. The Vorthi's anti-gravity modules were malfunctioning due to the magnetic interference from the rocky terrain. Even the Heliarians, who had relied heavily on their psychic abilities, were showing signs of fatigue as the planet's natural psionic interference grew stronger. Harry's progress, though slower, was steady. His years of training on Earth's most challenging terrains had taught him the value of pacing and resilience. He stayed hydrated, rationed his supplies carefully, and took short breaks when necessary to recover. His experience with Earth's harsh environments gave him an edge that the others, for all their advanced technology, lacked. The final stretch of the stage was a grueling climb up a steep hill, its surface littered with loose rocks and sharp edges. The competitors ahead of Harry were visibly exhausted, their movements sluggish. The Clitherans, too heavy to climb efficiently, resorted to brute force, but many slipped and fell back, losing precious time. The Vorthi struggled with their failing anti-gravity modules, while the Heliarians, drained from the earlier challenges, found it difficult to maintain their focus. Harry approached the hill with caution. He secured his rope and began the ascent, using his hands and feet to find stable holds. The climb was physically demanding, and his muscles burned with each movement. As he neared the top, he encountered a particularly difficult section where the rocks were loose and unstable. He paused, catching his breath and assessing his options. Instead of risking a direct climb, he used his rope to create a makeshift pulley system, allowing him to bypass the most dangerous section. When Harry finally reached the top, he found himself ahead of several competitors who had been forced to retreat or take alternative routes. The alien spectators erupted in astonishment. "He's not the strongest or the fastest," one commentator observed, "but his persistence and creativity are remarkable." As the sun dipped below the horizon, marking the end of the stage, Harry reached the checkpoint. He wasn't the first to arrive, but he wasn't the last either. More importantly, he had completed the stage without relying on advanced technology or enhancements, relying solely on his ingenuity, endurance, and determination. While the other competitors rested, many nursing injuries or tending to malfunctioning equipment, Harry quietly prepared for the next day. His body was sore, his hands blistered, but his resolve remained unshaken. He knew that the road ahead would only get tougher, but he also knew that giving up was not an option. For Harry, this competition was more than just a test of endurance, it was a chance to show the galaxy what humanity was truly capable of. Little did the others know, Harry's greatest strength was yet to be revealed. The third day on Varkalon dawned with a bitter chill, the desert heat of the previous day giving way to the icy bite of the planet's early morning winds. The competition's third stage would be the most perilous yet a sprawling, hostile expanse known as the Shadowed Expanse. This region of the planet was infamous across the galaxy for its treacherous terrain, unpredictable storms, and the presence of predatory creatures known as Screthans, which thrived in its perpetual twilight. The shadowed expanse was a place where technology and psychic abilities faltered, rendering even the most advanced equipment unreliable. For this reason, it was dubbed the Equalizer by those who knew of its dangers. The competitors gathered at the checkpoint, their exhaustion visible but their resolve unbroken. Each carried a small ration pack and a tracker device to monitor their location. Beyond that, they were on their own. Harry Carter stood among them, his simple gear a stark contrast to the sleek suits and devices of his alien peers. His movements were slow but deliberate as he stretched his aching muscles, preparing for the challenge ahead. Despite the fatigue gnawing at his body, his mind remained sharp. He had spent the previous night studying the limited maps of the shadowed expanse, committing its key landmarks to memory. While the others relied on their tools and powers, Harry trusted his instincts and preparation. The signal to begin sounded, and the competitors set off into the gloom. The terrain immediately proved unforgiving. The ground was uneven, a mix of jagged rocks and soft, shifting sand that made every step a gamble. Visibility was poor, the faint light from the sky barely enough to illuminate the path ahead. Strange sounds echoed in the distance: growls, chirps, and the occasional eerie howl. The Skrythans were out there, hunting. The Hillyrians, accustomed to navigating through psychic resonance, quickly found themselves disoriented. The psionic interference in the shadowed expanse was unlike anything they had encountered before, rendering their abilities ineffective. One of them, a tall figure with shimmering blue skin, faltered and nearly stumbled into a sinkhole before catching themselves. The Vorthi fared no better. Their anti-gravity modules, which had been a significant advantage in the earlier stages, began to malfunction due to the region's magnetic anomalies. Sparks flew as one competitor struggled to recalibrate their system, their frustration evident. The Clitharans relied on their brute strength to plow through the terrain, but even their thick exoskeletons couldn't shield them from the relentless environment. Sharp rocks scraped against their carapaces, and their weight caused them to sink into the softer patches of sand, forcing them to expend significant energy to free themselves. Harry moved with calculated precision, his every step deliberate. He avoided the softer sand by observing subtle color changes in the ground, a skill he had honed during survival training on Earth. When he encountered sharp rocks, he adjusted his gait to minimize the impact on his already sore feet. His progress was slow compared to some of the others, but it was steady, and most importantly, he conserved energy. Halfway through the stage, the true danger of the shadowed expanse revealed itself. Dark clouds rolled in from the horizon, blotting out what little light remained. A violent electrical storm erupted, bolts of green lightning crackling across the sky. The wind howled, carrying with it clouds of abrasive dust that stung exposed skin and reduced visibility to nearly zero. The competitors scrambled for cover. The Clitharans huddled together, their massive forms shielding each other from the worst of the storm. The Vorthi activated emergency shelters, small domes of energy that provided temporary protection but drained their power reserves. The Hillyrians tried to create psychic shields, but the interference rendered their efforts ineffective, leaving them vulnerable. Harry, caught in the open, didn't panic. He spotted a cluster of rocks that provided some natural shelter and quickly made his way there. Using his poncho as a makeshift shield, he crouched low and waited out the worst of the storm. The dust filled his nose and throat, and the cold bit at his exposed hands, but he endured, his mind focused on conserving energy and staying alert. When the storm finally subsided, it became clear that the shadowed expanse had taken its toll. Several competitors were visibly shaken, their progress significantly slowed. The storm had also disoriented many, leaving them uncertain of their position. The Skrythans, sensing weakness, began to close in. These predatory creatures were perfectly adapted to the shadowed expanse. With their sleek, shadowy forms and razor-sharp claws, they moved silently across the terrain, their glowing red eyes the only warning of their approach. The first attack came swiftly. A Vorthi competitor let out a startled cry as a Skrythan pounced, its claws raking against their energy shield. Though the shield held, the force of the attack knocked them off balance, and they barely managed to escape. The competitors began to scatter, each trying to evade the predators. The Clitharans, despite their size, found themselves overwhelmed as multiple Skrythans coordinated their attacks. The Hillyrians, unable to rely on their psychic powers, used their agility to dodge the creatures, but their stamina was waning. Harry observed the chaos from his vantage point. He knew he couldn't outrun the Skrythans, nor could he fight them head-on. Instead, he relied on his knowledge of predator behavior. Scrithins were drawn to movement and sound, so Harry moved slowly and silently, keeping low to the ground. When a pair of glowing red eyes appeared in the distance, he froze, holding his breath until the creature moved on. At one point, Harry came across a fellow competitor, a Hillyrian who had sprained their leg and was struggling to move. The sight triggered a memory from his training on Earth, an instructor's voice reminding him of the importance of teamwork, even in individual challenges. Against his better judgment, Harry approached the Hillyrian and helped them to their feet. Together, they moved cautiously, supporting each other as they navigated the treacherous terrain. As night fell, the checkpoint came into view, a faint glow in the distance that signaled safety. The remaining competitors pushed themselves to their limits, desperate to reach it before the Scrithins closed in. Harry and the Hillyrian moved as quickly as they could, their progress hindered by the latter's injury. In the final stretch, a Scrithin lunged at them, its claws narrowly missing Harry as he threw himself to the side. Acting on instinct, Harry grabbed a nearby rock and hurled it at the creature, striking it in the eye. The Scrithin recoiled, giving them a brief window to escape. When Harry and the Hillyrian finally crossed the checkpoint, they collapsed from exhaustion. The officials at the checkpoint, a mix of robotic attendants and alien medics, immediately tended to their injuries. The other competitors who had made it were in various states of disarray, their advanced gear battered and their spirits shaken. For Harry, the shadowed expanse had been a turning point. He had survived not through superior technology or brute strength, but through resilience, resourcefulness, and an unyielding determination to keep going. The alien spectators, who had once dismissed him, now watched with a mix of awe and respect. They were beginning to understand that humanity's greatest strength wasn't in its tools or its might, but in its refusal to surrender in the face of insurmountable odds. Little did they know, the most challenging part of the competition was yet to come. For Harry, this was only the beginning of what would become an unforgettable journey. The checkpoint after the shadowed expanse was eerily quiet, the air thick with exhaustion and tension. The surviving competitors rested in scattered groups, their once pristine uniforms now torn and caked with dirt. Medics moved between them, patching wounds and administering hydration packs. The once boisterous Clitharans sat in silence, their carapaces scratched and dulled. The Vorthia meticulously repaired their malfunctioning devices, frustration etched into their faces. Even the serene Hillyrians seemed shaken, their glowing auras dimmed by the psionic interference that had rendered them nearly helpless. Harry Carter, the lone human among them, sat apart from the others, methodically cleaning the scratches on his arms with a small antiseptic kit. His body ached, and his muscles protested every movement, but his resolve remained intact. Unlike his competitors, who relied on advanced technology or psychic powers, Harry had only his instincts and training to guide him. The strain was evident in his every movement, but there was no sign of defeat in his eyes. The stormy skies above hinted at the next challenge. A metallic structure loomed on the horizon, visible even from the checkpoint, a massive, abandoned facility left behind by an ancient, unknown race. The Galactic Academy referees announced that the next phase of the competition would take place inside the ruins. It was a labyrinth of twisting corridors, deadly traps, and puzzles designed to test not just physical endurance but mental acuity as well. Many of the alien competitors perked up at this. They were confident that their technological enhancements or superior intellect would give them an edge. The competitors were given an hour to recover before being herded toward the entrance of the ruins. Harry observed his surroundings carefully as they approached. The ruins were colossal, with towering spires that seemed to pierce the heavens. The architecture was alien even by galactic standards, its jagged shapes and dark metal radiating an aura of foreboding. Harry couldn't help but feel a shiver run down his spine. Whatever civilization had built this place was long gone, but their creations were anything but dead. As they reached the massive gates of the ruins, a low hum resonated through the air. The gates groaned and shifted, opening just wide enough for the competitors to enter. The referees briefed them the goal was to navigate the labyrinth and reach the central chamber, where a series of final puzzles awaited. The first to complete the puzzles and reach the exit would gain a significant lead in the competition. However, the labyrinth was littered with traps and challenges that could disqualify or even harm those who weren't careful. The competitors were released one by one into the ruins, their paths immediately diverging as they disappeared into the labyrinth. Harry entered last, stepping into the darkness with only a basic flashlight and a map etched into his memory. The air inside was cold and oppressive, the walls lined with strange, glowing symbols that pulsed faintly as he passed. The light from his flashlight flickered slightly, and he tapped it to steady the beam. He could hear the distant echoes of his competitors' footsteps, the faint hum of Vorthi devices, and the occasional frustrated shout. The first part of the labyrinth was deceptively simple, a series of corridors that twisted and turned in seemingly random directions. Harry moved cautiously, marking his path with small pieces of chalk to avoid getting lost. He noticed subtle patterns in the architecture, slight indentations in the walls and faint shifts in the glowing symbols. While the others charged ahead, relying on speed to navigate, Harry took his time, observing his surroundings and using the patterns to guide him. It wasn't long before the traps began to reveal themselves. One corridor suddenly erupted with energy beams, narrowly missing a Hilarion competitor who darted back with a startled cry. Another passage collapsed entirely, its floor crumbling into a dark abyss. Harry avoided these dangers by staying vigilant, his senses heightened by the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He used his surroundings as a guide, testing unstable sections of the floor with a long stick he had picked up earlier and listening carefully for the faint mechanical clicks that often preceded a trap's activation. The real challenge began deeper within the ruins, where the corridors gave way to larger chambers filled with puzzles. Each chamber required a combination of logic, observation, and physical dexterity to proceed. In one chamber, Harry encountered a massive, rotating platform suspended over a pit of spikes. The platform was divided into sections, each marked with a different glowing symbol. It didn't take long for Harry to realize that stepping on the wrong symbol caused the platform to tilt violently. He paused to study the symbols, recalling the patterns he had seen earlier in the labyrinth. Slowly, he pieced together the sequence that would allow him to cross safely. While some competitors relied on brute force or technological analysis to solve the puzzles, Harry relied on his memory and reasoning. He stepped carefully from one section to the next, the platform creaking ominously with every move. When he reached the other side, he allowed himself a brief moment of relief before pressing on. Another chamber presented a different kind of challenge, a series of levers and pulleys that controlled a set of massive doors. The solution required not just strength but timing and coordination. Harry observed the mechanism for several minutes, noting how each lever affected the others. He adjusted his approach, pulling and releasing the levers in a precise sequence until the doors groaned open. He couldn't help but smile as he stepped through, knowing he had succeeded where others might have failed. As Harry moved deeper into the ruins, he began to notice something unsettling. The glowing symbols on the walls were changing, their patterns becoming more erratic. The faint hum that had accompanied him since the beginning grew louder, almost like a heartbeat. The air itself seemed heavier, charged with an electric tension that made his skin prickle. He realized that the labyrinth wasn't just a test of skill, it was alive, responding to the competitor's presence. In one particularly harrowing moment, Harry entered a chamber filled with moving platforms and spinning blades. The slightest misstep could have been fatal, but he navigated the chamber with a combination of agility and careful planning. As he reached the exit, he spotted a Clitheran competitor struggling to climb back onto a platform after nearly falling into the blade-filled pit below. Despite their earlier taunts, Harry extended a hand, helping the Clitheran to safety. The alien hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with accepting help from a human, but eventually nodded in gratitude before rushing ahead. By the time Harry reached the central chamber, he was one of the last competitors to arrive. The room was massive, its walls lined with intricate carvings that seemed to shift and shimmer in the dim light. In the center stood a pedestal with a glowing orb, surrounded by a series of intricate mechanisms. The final puzzle required competitors to decipher the carvings and manipulate the mechanisms to align the orb with a series of glowing conduits. The competitors who had arrived earlier were already struggling with the puzzle. The Vorthi, frustrated by the lack of clear instructions, resorted to brute forcing the mechanisms, while the Hilarions tried and failed to use their weakened psychic abilities to decipher the carvings. The Clitherans, lacking the finesse needed for the delicate adjustments, had given up entirely. Harry approached the puzzle with a calm focus. He studied the carvings, noting their resemblance to the symbols he had seen throughout the labyrinth. Slowly, he began to piece together the sequence needed to align the orb. His hands moved with steady precision, adjusting the mechanisms one by one. The other competitors watched in stunned silence as the glowing conduits began to light up, one after the other. When the final conduit lit up, a low hum filled the room, and the pedestal began to glow. The orb rose into the air, casting a radiant light that illuminated the chamber. A hidden door slid open, revealing the exit. Harry stepped back, allowing the others to follow before him. He didn't need to be first to prove his worth. For Harry, the revelation wasn't just about solving the puzzle, it was about showing the galaxy that humanity's strength lay in its ability to adapt, endure, and rise to any challenge. As he stepped through the exit, he knew the competition was far from over. But for the first time, the alien spectators and competitors began to see Harry not as an underdog, but as a formidable rival one who embodied the very essence of perseverance. The final stage of the competition took place on the peak of Varkalon's most infamous landmark, Mount Erythros. Rising high above the planet's tumultuous landscapes, the mountain was a test of endurance, strategy, and sheer willpower. Its summit, shrouded in thick clouds of toxic gas, was said to be unreachable for all but the most determined. This was where the Galactic Academy had chosen to end its grueling contest, where the victors would be decided. The surviving competitors stood at the base of the mountain, their bodies battered and their spirits worn thin. Each carried the scars of the challenges they had overcome. The Clitherans had cracks in their once impenetrable exoskeletons, the Vorthi's enhancements flickered with signs of strain, and the Hillyrians' once radiant auras had dimmed significantly. Harry Carter stood among them, quiet and focused. He had no advanced armor or psychic powers to rely on, just his determination and the unshakable belief in his ability to endure. The referees explained the rules. The climb to the summit would be unassisted. No outside devices, no external support, only what each competitor could carry with them. Along the way, they would encounter natural hazards, including avalanches, poisonous creatures, and the ever-present threat of hypoxia as the air grew thinner. The first to reach the summit would claim ultimate victory. As the signal was given, the competitors began their ascent. The mountain's lower slopes were deceptively easy, a gentle incline covered in loose gravel. The Clitherans took an early lead, their powerful limbs propelling them forward. The Vorthi followed closely, using their mechanical limbs to maintain a steady pace, while the Hillyrians floated just above the ground, conserving their energy. Harry hung back, observing the terrain and the movements of his competitors. He knew the real challenge lay ahead. The first obstacle came in the form of a narrow gorge, its edges crumbling and unstable. The Clitherans, confident in their strength, attempted to leap across but misjudged the distance. One of them barely managed to cling to the edge, their claws digging into the rocky surface. The Vorthi used their mechanical limbs to construct a makeshift bridge, while the Hillyrians floated effortlessly over the gap. Harry, watching carefully, noticed a hidden path winding down into the gorge and back up the other side. It was longer but safer. He chose the path, moving steadily and conserving energy while others expended theirs in risky maneuvers. As the climb continued, the terrain grew harsher. The loose gravel gave way to jagged rocks and sheer cliffs. The air grew colder, and a biting wind howled through the mountain passes. The competitors began to falter. The Clitherans, weighed down by their massive frames, struggled to find footholds on the cliffs. The Vorthi's mechanical enhancements began to overheat from the strain, and the Hillyrians, accustomed to relying on their psychic abilities, found themselves exhausted as the thin air weakened their focus. Harry pressed on, his pace slow but steady. He relied on his training from Earth's harshest environments, using his hands and feet to find stable holds on the cliffs. He knew the importance of pacing himself, of taking short breaks to catch his breath and keep his muscles from cramping. He carried only the essentials: a small hydration pack, a thermal blanket, and a simple climbing rope. His approach was methodical, each step calculated to minimize risk. Halfway up the mountain, the competitors faced their greatest challenge yet, a section known as the Frozen Labyrinth. This treacherous stretch was a series of narrow tunnels carved into the ice, filled with hidden crevasses and collapsing walls. The temperature plummeted to lethal levels, and the glare from the ice made it difficult to see. Many of the competitors hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. Harry entered the labyrinth with caution, his every movement deliberate. He used his flashlight to scan for weak spots in the ice, tapping the ground with a stick to test its stability. When he encountered a collapsed tunnel, he backtracked and searched for an alternative route. At one point, he heard the faint sound of someone calling for help. Following the voice, he discovered a Vorthi competitor trapped beneath a fallen block of ice. Despite the risks, Harry stopped to help, using his rope as leverage to free the competitor. The Vorthi, surprised and grateful, nodded in acknowledgement before continuing on. As Harry emerged from the frozen labyrinth, he saw the summit for the first time. It was still a daunting climb away, shrouded in swirling clouds of toxic gas. The final stretch was the most perilous and nearly vertical ascent on unstable rocks, with the wind threatening to knock climbers off balance. Many of the competitors who had made it this far were now struggling to move, their bodies pushed to the brink of exhaustion. Harry took a deep breath and began his ascent. His hands and feet ached from the cold, and his lungs burned with each breath of the thin, frigid air. He moved slowly, anchoring himself with his rope whenever possible. The wind howled around him, pulling at his poncho and threatening to tear him from the mountain. He focused on the small, achievable goals, one foothold, then another, then the next. As he climbed, he passed several competitors who had been forced to stop, their bodies unable to continue. The Clitherans, once so confident, were huddled against the rocks, their strength sapped by the cold. The Hillyrians, who had relied on their psychic abilities throughout the competition, were too drained to push forward. Even the Vorthi, with their advanced technology, found themselves at a standstill, their mechanical limbs frozen by the icy winds. Harry pressed on, his mind a blur of pain and determination. He thought of Earth, of the lessons he had learned from its unforgiving landscapes. He thought of the naysayers who had dismissed humanity as weak, and of the countless times he had been told he didn't belong here. Each step was a defiance of those doubts, a testament to the resilience that defined his species. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Harry reached the summit. The air was thin and his vision blurred from exhaustion, but he could see the beacon that marked the finish line. He stumbled forward, his legs barely able to support him, and touched the beacon with trembling hands. A soft chime echoed through the air, signaling his victory. The other competitors arrived one by one, some collapsing from exhaustion as they reached the summit. The referees, transported to the peak by hovercraft, administered medical aid and recorded the results. When Harry's name was announced as the winner, a stunned silence fell over the crowd of alien spectators watching the live broadcast. Harry didn't celebrate. He was too tired to do more than sit down and wrap himself in his thermal blanket, but the significance of his achievement was not lost on him. He had proven that humanity's strength wasn't in its technology or its physical prowess, it was in its determination, its adaptability, and its refusal to give up. As the competitors were transported back to the Galactic Academy, Harry received nods of respect from those who had once mocked him. The Clitherans, Vorthi, and Hillyrians each acknowledged his triumph in their own ways. For Harry, the victory was bittersweet. He had not only won the competition but had also earned the respect of species that had once looked down on humans. The Galactic Academy awarded Harry the title of Champion of Endurance, his name etched into the annals of intergalactic history. But for Harry, the true reward was the realization that he had changed perceptions of humanity. His journey had shown the galaxy that humans, though small and seemingly insignificant in the grand scheme of things, possessed a strength that could rival the greatest civilizations. As he stood on the Academy's podium, the galaxy watching, Harry raised his head high. He didn't need to say a word. His actions had spoken louder than any proclamation ever could.